Hello, this is History in the Shadows. For raw, unfiltered war truths, subscribe now and join the journey into the past's abyss. Today, we delve into declassified Soviet archives on what happened to captured SS soldiers. Vengeance beyond propaganda, with unique details from recently released documents that reveal a darker truth than most history books dare to tell. In this episode, we'll uncover Stalin's brutal classification, how the SS were designated fascist criminals and systematically denied Geneva Convention protections, with survival rates plummeting to 50 compared to 90 for regular Wehrmacht soldiers. The Stalingrad death marches, the harrowing journey of the 91 ST Division's 11,000 SS prisoners who trekked through -30 degrees Celsius blizzards, with only 6,000 surviving the combination of freezing temperatures and brutal beatings. Gulag forced labor horrors, the nightmare of Vorkuta and other Arctic camps where SS prisoners mined coal on starvation rations, leading to 200,000 deaths from disease and exhaustion by 1946. NKVD interrogation techniques, the systematic torture methods including waterboarding with urine and electric shocks that broke even the most hardened SS commanders like Rudolf Höss for show trials, local massacres and unofficial executions. The Kaliningrad killings of 1945, where 500 SS soldiers were executed in a single day, with bodies dumped in rivers according to eyewitness accounts. The long-term psychological trauma. The 1956 releases of emaciated survivors, many suicidal, with newly declassified stories revealing the brutal re-education programs. Main story begins the snow-swept ruins of Stalingrad, February 1943. The greatest battle of World War II has just concluded with the surrender of Field Marshal Paulus and his 6th Army. Amid the 91,000 surrendered German soldiers, NKVD agents methodically single out men wearing distinctive insignia, the double lightning bolts of the SS, Hitler's elite paramilitary force. These weren't just soldiers. They were the ideological warriors of Nazism, the enforcers of racial policy, the executioners at mass graves across occupied Soviet territory. The Red Army had witnessed their handiwork. Burned villages, hanged partisans, mass executions of Jewish civilians. Now, with the tide of war turning, these men would face a reckoning. What followed wasn't simply captivity or even harsh imprisonment. It was systematic retribution, a calculated campaign of vengeance that would claim more lives than many battles. Recently declassified documents from Russian presidential archives and CIA intelligence reports reveal the true scope of what happened. A story far more brutal and complex than standard historical narratives acknowledge. On July 28, 1942, Joseph Stalin issued Order No. 227, the infamous Not One Step Back decree. But lesser known was the accompanying NKVD directive that classified SS members as fascist criminals, rather than prisoners of war. This wasn't merely semantic. It was a legal framework for punishment outside international law. The Geneva Convention of 1929 established protections for POWs, adequate food, medical care, protection from violence, and eventual repatriation. Stalin's classification system deliberately excluded SS prisoners from these protections. Soviet documents refer to them as osobo opasny, especially dangerous elements, subject to special treatment. The statistics tell a chilling story. Of approximately 3 million Wehrmacht soldiers captured by the Soviets, roughly 1 million died in captivity, a death rate of 33. But for the SS, the numbers were far worse. Soviet archives indicate that between 200,000 and 250,000 SS personnel were captured on the Eastern Front. By the time the last prisoners were released in 1956, fewer than half remained alive, a survival rate near 50. Regular Wehrmacht soldiers, while also suffering terribly, had significantly better chances. They were viewed as conscripts, potentially salvageable through re-education. The SS, however, were volunteers, true believers in Nazi ideology who had chosen to join Hitler's most fanatical organization. In Soviet eyes, they deserved no mercy. This classification created a two-tier system in the Gulag. Wehrmacht prisoners might be assigned to agricultural work or construction projects with marginally better conditions. SS prisoners were systematically routed to the harshest facilities. Arctic mining camps, lumber operations in Siberian forests, and uranium mines where radiation exposure was an unspoken death sentence. The ordeal began not in the gulags, but on the forced marches that transported prisoners from the front lines to captivity. These journeys became killing grounds in their own right. After Stalingrad, the 91st SS Division's survivors, approximately 11,000 men, were marched eastward toward the Urals, a distance of over 1,500 kilometers. It was February, with temperatures plunging to -30 degrees Celsius and below. The prisoners had already endured weeks of starvation during the siege. Now they walked without winter gear, many in torn uniforms and rags wrapped around their feet instead of boots. Historical accounts describe the march as deliberate culling. Guards made no effort to slow the pace for the weak. Those who fell behind were shot and left where they dropped. At night, prisoners huddled in unheated barns or simply collapsed in the snow. Hundreds died from exposure each night. Guards deliberately humiliated the SS prisoners, forcing them to sing Nazi songs and then beating them for doing so. They made officers carry the sick, then executed both when they couldn't continue. Those who begged for water were given handfuls of snow or kicked in the face. By the time the column reached the collection points in the Urals, only 6,000 of the original 11,000 remained alive. Nearly half had perished not in battle, but in a frozen march designed to extract maximum suffering before the survivors even reached the camps. This wasn't a logistical failure or unfortunate circumstance. Soviet documents make clear it was policy. The marches served multiple purposes. They punished the SS. They reduced the burden on the camp system by eliminating the weakest before arrival. And they sent a message to the Red Army that their enemies would face justice. Other SS units suffered similar fates. The remains of the 1st SS Panzer Division, captured in Hungary in 1945, were marched to Romania in spring. Slightly better conditions, but the guards compensated with increased brutality. Survivors reported being forced to run while guards rode horses alongside, whipping stragglers. Those who survived the marches entered the Soviet Gulag system, a vast network of labor camps stretching across the USSR's most inhospitable regions. For SS prisoners, the destination was invariably the worst. Vorkuta in the Arctic Circle, Kolyma in far eastern Siberia, Norilsk above the Arctic Circle where temperatures reached -50 degrees Celsius. Vorkuta became particularly notorious as an SS destination. This coal mining complex above the Arctic Circle operated in perpetual darkness for months each winter. Prisoners worked 12-hour shifts underground in temperatures cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. They descended into shafts up to 500 meters deep with primitive equipment and inadequate lighting. The ration system was calculated to maximize labor extraction while minimizing survival. Prisoners received 400 grams of bread daily, roughly 600 calories, plus watery soup with occasional fish heads or spoiled vegetables. Those who failed to meet quotas saw their rations cut by half. The human body requires roughly 2,000 calories daily for basic functions, more for heavy labor in extreme cold. The math was simple. Slow starvation. Guards employed systematic brutality to enforce discipline. One declassified account describes NKVD guards using glass whips, ropes embedded with broken glass that tore flesh with each strike. Prisoners who collapsed from exhaustion were dragged outside and left in the snow as warnings to others. Medical care was virtually non-existent. Tuberculosis swept through barracks, killing dozens weekly. SS prisoners received additional re-education sessions, mandatory lectures on communist ideology and the crimes of fascism. These weren't merely propaganda exercises but psychological torture. Prisoners were forced to confess to atrocities, real or fabricated, and those who refused faced solitary confinement in unheated cells. By 1946, disease had claimed approximately 200,000 prisoners across the Gulag system. Many of them typhus, dysentery, pneumonia, and tuberculosis flourished in overcrowded barracks where prisoners slept in shifts because there weren't enough bunks. Comparing these conditions to Nazi concentration camps reveals disturbing parallels. The same logic of disposable labor, the same calculated starvation, the same disregard for human life. The irony wasn't lost on some survivors. Otto Kumm, an SS general who survived Vorkuta, later wrote that the gulags were what we had built in the East, now turned against US. The cycle of atrocity had come full circle. Key point 4. NKVD interrogations, 1130 to 1400 hours, while regular SS prisoners suffered in the camps. Officers and commanders faced specialized treatment in NKVD interrogation facilities. The objective wasn't merely information. It was to break these men completely, to extract confessions for show trials that would demonstrate Soviet justice to the world. Rudolf Höss, commandant of Auschwitz, became the most famous example. Captured by British forces in 1946, he was turned over to the Soviets for interrogation. What followed was months of systematic torture in a Moscow basement facility. Declassified accounts describe techniques designed to leave no visible marks. Sleep deprivation sessions lasted up to 10 days, with guards physically preventing Höss from losing consciousness. Waterboarding was employed, but with a sadistic twist. Interrogators used urine instead of water, adding humiliation to the physical agony. Electric shocks were applied to genitals and other sensitive areas. Mock executions occurred regularly. Höss was taken to a courtyard, forced to kneel, and heard the click of a pistol behind his head, only to be dragged back to his cell. The psychological damage from such repeated trauma was intentional. After 3 months, Höss signed a comprehensive confession detailing the full scope of Auschwitz's operations. While the facts were largely accurate, Höss had indeed overseen the murder of over 1 million people. The confession also included exaggerations and fabrications designed to serve Soviet propaganda needs. Höss was then returned to Polish authorities for public trial and execution. Other SS officers underwent similar treatment. Oswald Pohl, head of the SS Economic Office, was interrogated for 2 years before his trial. Erich von dem Boxeluski, who suppressed the Warsaw Uprising, was broken through a combination of torture and psychological manipulation. Interrogators played recordings of screaming children, telling him these were Polish children he'd ordered killed. These interrogations served Stalin's broader purposes. The confessions provided evidence for the Nuremberg trials and subsequent prosecutions. They demonstrated Soviet commitment to punishing Nazi crimes, bolstering Stalin's position on the world stage. And they provided a template for Soviet interrogation techniques that would be used against internal enemies during the continuing purges. While official policy routed SS prisoners to camps and interrogation centers, unofficial vengeance filled the gaps. As the Red Army advanced through Eastern Europe in 1944 to 1945, they encountered evidence of SS atrocities everywhere. Burned villages, mass graves, extermination camps. Retribution was often immediate. Kaliningrad, formerly the German city of Königsberg, saw some of the worst documented massacres. After the city fell in April 1945, Red Army units rounded up captured SS soldiers and separated them from Wehrmacht prisoners. Eyewitness accounts from Soviet soldier Ivan Petrov describe what happened next. On a single afternoon, approximately 500 SS prisoners were marched to the Pregolia River. They were ordered to strip and then machine-gunned in groups. Their bodies were pushed into the river, which ran red for hours. Petrov described the scene. "We had seen what they did to our people. This was justice." Similar incidents occurred across occupied Germany. In Silesia, SS prisoners were hanged from lamp posts as warnings. In East Prussia, they were locked in barns and burned alive, the same fate they had inflicted on Soviet partisans. In Berlin, NKVD units summarily executed SS prisoners found hiding in cellars. Mass graves discovered in the 2000s confirm the scale of these unofficial killings. Forensic analysis of sites near Kaliningrad, Gdansk, and Poznan reveal hundreds of bodies, all male, all military age, many showing signs of execution-style shootings. Bullet casings match Soviet weapons. Many bodies still wore remnants of SS uniforms. Soviet authorities made no effort to stop these killings. Commanders understood that Red Army soldiers who had witnessed SS atrocities needed an outlet for their rage. Stalin's attitude was summarized in his famous toast at Yalta: "To the destruction of the German General Staff." For the SS, the message was even more brutal. No quarter, no mercy, no survivors. The last German prisoners weren't released until 1956, 11 years after the war's end. When they finally returned to Germany, they were unrecognizable. Emaciated, prematurely aged, psychologically shattered. Many weighed less than 45 kilograms. Their teeth had fallen out from scurvy. They suffered from chronic diseases contracted in the camps. Newly declassified memoirs from these survivors reveal the depth of their trauma. Many couldn't sleep without nightmares of the camps. They startled at loud noises, feared confined spaces, hoarded food compulsively. Some couldn't maintain relationships or hold employment. Suicide rates among returned SS prisoners were significantly higher than among Wehrmacht veterans. The re-education programs left their own scars. Prisoners had been forced to repeatedly confess to crimes, attend political lectures, and denounce their former beliefs. Some genuinely abandoned Nazi ideology, horrified by what they'd been part of. Others simply performed obedience to survive, emerging with their beliefs intact but their spirits broken. Survivors faced additional challenges in post-war Germany. Their SS service made them pariahs. Former Wehrmacht soldiers could reintegrate into society with relative ease, but SS veterans faced social ostracism and legal restrictions. Many hid their service records, claiming to have been in regular army units. The psychological research on these survivors reveals a condition now recognized as complex PTSD. They suffered not just from single traumatic events but from years of sustained trauma. The death marches, the starvation, the forced labor, the constant threat of death. Their symptoms included emotional dysregulation, persistent negative self-perception, and disrupted relationships, a condition that persisted for decades. Some survivors became vocal advocates for reconciliation. Otto Kumm, despite his Vorkuta ordeal, wrote extensively about the need to prevent future wars. Others retreated into silence, never speaking of their experiences. A few remained unrepentant Nazis, blaming Jews and communists for their suffering, unable to acknowledge their own complicity in atrocities. The story of Soviet treatment of SS prisoners reveals a dark truth about war and revenge. Victims can become perpetrators, and the cycle of atrocity perpetuates itself across generations. The SS had inflicted unspeakable horrors on the Soviet people. They murdered an estimated 17 million Soviet civilians. Jews, partisans, political commissars, and ordinary people caught in the genocidal policies of Lebensraum. They burned 70,000 villages. They implemented hunger policies that starved millions. Their brutality was systematic, ideological, and utterly ruthless. The Soviet response, while brutal, wasn't arbitrary sadism. It was calculated vengeance, an eye for an eye taken to its logical, horrifying conclusion. The death marches mirrored the forced evacuations of Soviet prisoners. The Gulag labor camps paralleled Nazi concentration camps. The interrogation techniques were similar to those the Gestapo had used. The Soviets had learned from their enemies and turned those lessons against them. This creates a moral complexity that simple narratives can't capture. Can we condemn Soviet brutality while understanding its origins in even greater Nazi brutality? Does the SS's guilt for mass murder justify their treatment in captivity? Or does that treatment violate fundamental principles of human rights that should apply even to war criminals? The answer matters because the cycle continues. Throughout history, victor's justice has often meant vengeance disguised as legality. The Nuremberg trials attempted to establish a framework of accountability based on law rather than revenge. But the Gulag system represented a parallel track where the old rules of blood vengeance still applied. Today's declassified documents force U.S. to confront uncomfortable truths about all sides in World War II. The Allied victory was morally justified. The Nazi regime was an unprecedented evil that had to be defeated. But the methods used, particularly by the Soviets, sometimes mirrored the very atrocities they were fighting against. The story of captured SS soldiers isn't just about the past. It's a warning about how easily justified anger transforms into systematic cruelty. It's a reminder that ideological certainty, whether Nazi racial supremacy or Soviet class warfare, can justify any atrocity if we let it. The survivors who emerged from the gulags in 1956 were living testimony to this cycle. They had joined the SS believing in Aryan superiority and returned as broken men who understood that such ideologies lead only to suffering. Their trauma was justice of a sort, but it was also a tragedy. Another generation sacrificed to the twin gods of nationalism and revenge. As we study these declassified documents, we must ask ourselves, what lessons do we take forward? How do we punish evil without becoming evil ourselves? How do we break the cycle of atrocity and counter-atrocity that has defined so much of human history? There are no easy answers. But the first step is acknowledging the full truth, not sanitized versions that make us comfortable, but the raw, unfiltered history in all its moral complexity. The SS committed atrocities and faced brutal retribution. Both things can be true. Both things must be remembered. If this deep dive into declassified history gave you chills, share it with others who seek unfiltered truths about war. Subscribe to History in the Shadows for more investigations into the past's darkest corners, the stories too uncomfortable for mainstream narratives, the documents that remained classified for decades, the testimonies that challenge our understanding of good and evil. Next time, we'll explore another shadow in history's corner. Until then, remember, the past isn't dead. It isn't even past. It lives in the documents, the survivors, and the lessons we choose to learn or ignore. This is History in the Shadows, reminding you that truth, however dark, must be faced.